Welcome to the Writing of God. Today, we have the main event, the story of the first century Jesus revolution that brought all of the populace and later the Gentiles as well back into Teshuvah, return to Yehovah. They called him Yeshua HaMashiach. We have his Gospels. They are written in Hebrew. They are the original word of our Messiah, which gives us deeper insights and deeper context into the first century. This was the most esteemed book in the early church. When there are conflicts in the Greek text, they would go back to the Hebrew Gospel in order to resolve them. Yet, in the 2,000 years since then, it has become literally the most forbidden book in the history of humankind. How did that happen? Why did it happen? We're going to teach you all about it. The origin, the authenticity. We've prepared for you a personal study journal. People will want to know this evidence. This will teach you how to do it. And that's beginning right now. Welcome to the main event, where we bring you the living, dynamic presence of Yehovah and his son, Yeshua the Messiah, into my life, into your lives, and into the lives of all those that we touch. And we do this by diving deeply into the fountainhead of the Word, the Hebrew Gospels. For the past several years, I've been busy translating the Hebrew Gospels. As a professional linguist, I have 3 degrees in linguistics and languages and a lifetime of professional experience. I can tell you that translation is seldom exact. There is always some meaning that is added and some meaning that is lost. It's the nature of the beast, because no 2 languages are exact, nor the cultures that they reflect. Sometimes that difference is minuscule, and sometimes it is really dramatic. I invite you to join us on a journey back to the fountainhead of the original text of the Hebrew Gospels. Because up until now, everything we know about our Hebrew Messiah comes to us through the Greek filter of a different language, culture, and thought. So let's begin with the most important question there is to ask about the Hebrew Gospels. Are the Hebrew Gospels authentic? And does it matter whether the Gospels were originally written in Hebrew or in Greek? Heretofore, everything we know about our Hebrew Messiah has come to us through the Greek filter of different language, culture, and thought. The original gospel was written in Hebrew, according to all of the early church fathers. And let it be known that there was no single church father who ever denied that the Hebrew gospel, the original gospel of Matthew, was written in Hebrew, even those who didn't like the Hebrew gospels. It is the only gospel written by an apostle. It is the only eyewitness account. John was edited by Gentile Greek editors. It's very clear in the gospel. It says so. So the only eyewitness account we have is Hebrew Matthew. It was the only gospel originally written entirely in Hebrew. It was by far the earliest gospel, and it was called by the early church fathers the authentic gospel. All the early church fathers referred to the Hebrew Gospels. There are 75 different attestations. We could sit here all day going over all of the attestations from the early church history. We're not going to do that. There's plenty more detail in my book, The Sons of Zion versus the Sons of Greece. But we're going to look at a few of these so you'll have a sense of it. Including these attestations, there are 80 different quotations from the Hebrew Gospel. And we're going to look at these as well. It was the most highly esteemed document in the early church. Now, modern scholars disagree with this, all right? Now that we're 2,000 years down the road, scholarship now says that there really was no early Hebrew gospel. It was just incorrectly cited by Papias, who was the first to mention it in the 2nd century. And then because of the veneration of ancient documents, others kept on saying the same thing instead of uprooting the error. However, you're going to be the judge. You're going to get to see the evidence, and you be the judge if that's true. Even in modern times, even among many of our Hebraic roots leaders, many of these people have been trained in the seminary, which literally pounds into them, programming them that there is no Hebrew gospel. It's called Greek primacy of the Bible. Divine providence gave us the Bible in Greek, and that's that. So no Hebrew gospel existed. And you will get to investigate this and see if it's true. Now, here we have a statement from the Test Everything website. And in this one statement, there are 5 different factual errors, saying it's a new discovery, right? That any copies are very modern. You may hold a Bible in your hand, and the copyright on that Bible is probably only 10 or 20 years old. So why do we consider that the sacred word of God? We know that the origin of it is true and faithful to the word. That is what makes a document valid, not what date the copy is that you happen to have in your hand. But the message that we're receiving, even from many Hebraic roots leaders, is that there's nothing to see here. Move along, move along. The Hebrew Gospels never existed, and they don't exist now. That's why I am here tonight. I am not going to sit quietly while you are lied to about the most important biblical discovery since the Dead Sea Scrolls. I'm going to lay all the evidence on the table, show you the original texts and their translations, and you can be the judge of the validity of the Hebrew Gospels. Now, there are various Hebrew Gospels that have recently been rediscovered. And I predicted this years ago, that once the Hebrew Gospels were out of the bag, the many museums and libraries who have been sitting on them over the centuries would then begin to release their copies of Hebrew Gospels. And that has proven to be very true. In just the past month, in the month of December, I took a trip to Europe to check out whether this prediction of mine was correct. I'd already found several documents that were from the original Hebrew manuscript tradition. So I knew there must be more. So I went to Europe on a 30-day research blitz, and I discovered five new, heretofore unknown manuscripts of the Hebrew Gospels. And we will talk about each one of the extant manuscripts in time. Right now, we need to talk about whether these documents are authentic. Papias was the first to mention that the sayings of Yeshua were captured in the Hebrew language by Matthew. Irenaeus, the Bishop of Lyons, said Matthew published among the Hebrews a written gospel also in their own language. Hegesippus, who is called the father of church history because he was the first to write about church history, and he was a Jewish Christian, said that he used the gospel, it was said of him, he used the gospel written in his mother tongue, the gospel according to the Hebrews. Hippolytus, who wrote on the 12 apostles, Matthew, having written the gospel in Hebrew, published it in Jerusalem. Origen in the 2nd century said the first gospel was written by Matthew, who published it for those from Judaism who came to believe, composed as it was in the Hebrew language. Remember that for the first century, most of the congregants, who we now call Christians, were Jewish Christians. They were followers of the Messiah, and they were Hebrews. They were Hebrew speakers. And then the apostles took the Gospels to every corner of the globe. They carried the Hebrew Gospels with them. Eusebius said Matthew had first preached to the Hebrews, and when he was on the point of going to others, he transmitted in writing in his native language the gospel of Matthew, and thus supplied by writing the lack of his own presence to those from whom he was sent. So this was the pattern of the apostles. They might write down the Gospels in Hebrew and possibly in Greek at the same time, but when they were called away to go out into the world, they would leave behind their recollection of the Gospels for those left in Judea, those Jewish Christians, the Messianics, left in Judea. Epiphanius wrote that the Ebionites, which was an early sect of the Messianic church, used the Gospel of Matthew, call it according to the Hebrews, which Matthew issued in Hebrew. Again, Epiphanius, the bishop of Salamis, mentioned that there are also early translations of John and Acts in the library at Caesarea. And many Jewish Christians were converted by reading those Hebrew Gospels there. So there were early translations of the Gospels that were not written in Hebrew, so that they could compile a collection of the entire Hebrew Gospels. What we know is that Matthew, for certain, was written in Hebrew. Wasn't that great? Irenaeus, Papias, Hippolytus, Eusebius, Origen, all of these early church fathers knew about and praised the Hebrew Gospels as the true fountainhead of the Word. So what makes these different? We call them markers, Hebrew markers. What are the differences between the Hebrew Gospels and the Greek Gospels, and of what importance is that to us today? Well, one thing, get your personal study journal and join us on the next episode, but also support our translation work so we can take the Hebrew Gospels, translate them, and bring them to you, put them in your hands. So support that work at writingofgod.com, and we'll see you on the next episode of The Writing of God, the Hebrew Gospels. See you then. Are you trying to find the original experience of the first century church that revolutionized the world, the Jesus Revolution? Well, the best way to do that is to study the original word of the Messiah that they used, the Hebrew Gospels, which has recently been recovered, several manuscripts, and we have it for you to study on video, in workbook, in a book form, so that you can master the basics of the Hebrew Gospels, how they're different, what that tells us about our Hebrew Messiah. Everything we know about our Hebrew Messiah comes to us through a Greek filter of a different language, culture, and thought. Our Messiah was Hebrew, and these are the original words of our Savior in the Jesus movement of the first century. And this is something you can discover for yourself and see it in detail. All of these manuscripts translated and their intricacies and their differences explained to you in order to build a faith based on the original words of the Messiah. Go to writingofgod.com to get your copy. Again, this is appropriate for high school students or adults. It comes with the book, The Sons of Zion, on the history of the Messianic Church, the early church, and the study of the manuscript, all on video and in book form and workbooks.
That's online at thewritingofgod.com. That's online at thewritingofgod.com.
The idea of the Revelation of the Month Club began more than a decade ago when I was called by God to go all over the world and recover the manuscripts of the Hebrew Gospels. And I did so. I went to Israel, I went to England, I went to France, went to Spain, I went to Italy, and now we have members all over the world searching out these manuscripts so we can translate them and bring them to you. We're asking you to give us a small monthly donation so we can get these things to your door as soon as they are translated, long before they're published. You are our supporters. You get the first view at everything we do, whether it's translations or videos. You get it right there in your inbox, right in your home, every month as a member of the Revelation of the Month Club. Go to writingofgod.com to sign up.
Will you seek the Lord about becoming a partner to bring the message of the Writing of God to more people? Send your gift to The Writing of God, P.O. Box 294047, Kerrville, Texas 78029, or online at thewritingofgod.com. That's The Writing of God, P.O. Box 294047, Kerrville, Texas 78029, or online at thewritingofgod.com.